Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. Welcome to today's webinar, Swamplands as Untapped Climate Solutions, a look at the Hudson Bay Lowlands. My name is Jen Hawes. I am the Partnership Manager for Island Press, and I thank you for being here today with me. We have an excellent panel today, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about what you can expect from today's event. So, first, we'll have Jeff Wells give a brief introduction to our panelists right before they speak, and he'll also give some opening remarks, and he'll be moderating our conversation later. Ed Struzik's going to give a brief presentation on his new book, Swamplands. Vern Chihu will play a 2-minute video and then provide some opening remarks as well. Then Anna Badgio will have a brief video as well and provide her opening remarks in PowerPoint. Just a few housekeeping items. We encourage you to submit your questions at any time during the event itself today. You can do so with the questions tab here and the GoToWebinar control panel. If you have any trouble with the audio, video, or any other technical problems or questions, you can reach out via the chat and I'm happy to help. We will be having a survey at the end of the webinar. We encourage your feedback with this, so please do complete that survey. And the session is being recorded, so we encourage you to share that out as well. I wanted to give you a little bit of information about Island Press. Island Press began with the simple idea, knowledge is power. Our objective is to elevate voices of change, shine a spotlight on crucial issues, and focus attention on sustainable solutions like we're doing here today. We have 2 co-sponsors of the webinar this afternoon, Audubon Society. And the Audubon Society, as you all know, protects birds in the places they need today and tomorrow throughout the Americas, using science, advocacy, education, and on-the-ground conservation. Thank you for your sponsorship and participation today, Audubon. Wildlands League is another co-sponsor of our event today. With staff based across the United States and in Mexico, Wildlands League has been at the forefront of continental scale conservation for 30 years. Today's webinar participants are encouraged to pick up the phenomenal book that Ed has written called Swamplands, Tundra Beavers, Quaking Bogs, and the Improbable World of Peat. The book is 30% off from islandpress.org/book/swamplands with the code webinar. Now I'd like to introduce you to Jeff Wells, who is the Vice President of Boreal Conservation at National Audubon Society. Jeff's leading National Audubon's work to protect boreal forests, more than 1 billion acres of North American forests, wetlands, lakes, and rivers that span from the interior of Alaska across Canada to Newfoundland. He guides Audubon's teams' efforts on boreal-focused applied science and strategic communication to leverage public support for Indigenous protected and conserved areas and Indigenous guardian programs across the boreal forest biome. Throughout this work, some of the largest new land protections in modern history are taking place, supporting billions of nesting birds. With that, I will hand it over to Jeff.
Thank you, Jen. And thank all of you who are on this webinar to be part of this discussion. We have a really exciting set of panelists, all of whom are just incredible storytellers and have some real depth of experience in thinking about the future of this region. Just to add on to what Jen said about Audubon, we have programs that span from Chile to Canada, and we are focusing on kind of the biggest environmental issues of the day, from climate change to sustainable use of all sorts of lands, waters, oceans, forests, grasslands, and in the boreal, you know, on this vast landscape that we're talking about today. So that's why we're particularly interested in this discussion that's going to be happening about the Hudson Bay, James Bay lowlands, and its past and future. Just to put this in quick context here, this map here shows the location of the Hudson Bay, James Bay lowlands, which you can see in kind of geopolitical space, are obviously in Canada, spanning from Manitoba across to Ontario into Quebec, and just south of Hudson and James Bay, and north of the Great Lakes. So that's the kind of the geopolitical location of the place we're going to be focusing on today. Next slide. And this is a bit of the context in the boreal forest biome. Jen mentioned that's one of the areas that Audubon focuses on is conservation across this, one of the world's last very large intact forest biomes. That area just south of Hudson Bay in orange is kind of the oranges and browns is the carbon deposits within the Hudson James Bay lowlands, and you can see, you know, the vastness of those deposits, and you'll be hearing about that from others here in a few minutes. I want to introduce Ed Struzik next. You know, we're pleased that Ed wrote this incredible book that is just come out to give us a chance to talk about both the Hudson Bay, James Bay lowlands, but lots of wetlands and peatlands across the boreal and other places. It's just a real opportunity, and we're particularly fortunate because Ed is one of the top writers in the spheres of environmental science and policy working today. He's won numerous awards, and I think Jen's going to put a longer bio that explains some of those awards and accolades he's received. He's been writing for more than 30 years, taking amazing trips across the boreal forest, and one of the things that makes Ed's books so compelling is that he weaves together stories of suspense and trials through both his trips and experiences in the boreal, on his own trips and with scientists on the ground, so that the stories are so sort of interesting and compelling you can't put the books down. And I think maybe all of his books on the shelves behind me here. Just a favorite writer for me, and because he weaves in, along with those stories of suspense and adventure, all the science and environmental policy issues. Just an amazing ability to put all those together. And his most recent book here does that in an amazing way, and includes a focus in part of it on the Hudson Bay, James Bay lowlands. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Ed.
Thank you, Jeff. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Yeah? Okay. I'm going to talk about my book that Jeff just talked about, and I have to say that I'm a little flabbergasted. This has made my day. That was a wonderful introduction. So what are peatlands? Peatlands are bogs, fens, swamps, and marshes that accumulate peat in waterlogged, oxygen-starved conditions, such as this place in Jasper National Park. Peat is partially decayed vegetation that builds up over centuries, thousands of years. Mosses such as sphagnum and this one that Catherine Lafarge, a biologist, is looking at, are the foundation for peat. And bosses are very interesting because they can hold up to 25% of their weight in moisture, and they can survive drought and extremely cold temperatures. On this island on Ellesmere, Catherine pulled out a remnant of a moss that was 750 years old, I think, and she was able to grow it back in her lab. And peatlands occur pretty much everywhere. The Alakai Swamp on the Hawaiian island of Kauai, which I devote a chapter to, the high Arctic here on Ellesmere Island, which actually is storehouse for 4-million-year-old animals that existed there. 20,000 feet high at the base of the volcano in Bolivia, the Great Dismal Swamp, one of the most famous swamps in the world in Virginia, North Carolina. Indonesia, Africa, and parts of the Amazon have peatlands, as does the Isle of Skye in Scotland and other parts of the British Isles. There's even a remnant peatland in the Mojave Desert, which I also talk about in my book. And then we have coastal marshes such as Cape Cod and Kujibujawak in New Brunswick. We've not had a love affair with these places. They were traditionally seen as the haunts of will-o-wisps, jack-o'-lanterns, and moss people who would rise up at night and beg for food. And if they didn't get their food, they would steal their babies. Once Europe cut down most of its forest, it resorted to harvesting peat for fuel, because peat really is the precursor to coal. And American settlers brought these prejudices to the New World. They drained peatlands to grow crops, to cut down trees such as the Atlantic white cedar, which dominated the coastal marshes of the United States for hundreds of thousands of years before the Europeans came. And George Washington was the head of a company that tried to drain the Dismal, and he actually got Congress involved to invest in his company. And they used slaves to drain the swamp and to cut down trees. And for some of those slaves who escaped the plantations or the work camps, the swamp was a shortcut to freedom. Now, people might not know, but the Great Dismal was really the beginning of the Underground Railroad that brought people, enslaved people, from Virginia, North Carolina to Canada. Many were hunted down by dogs. Others hid in the deepest, darkest parts of the swamp before finding their way to Canada. But we've only just learned this from archaeological evidence that many stayed and raised families because there was so much to be had in that swamp, in those peatlands. There was tremendous amount of game to be hunted, fish and root berries, root vegetables and berries. And so several generations of enslaved people actually lived in the swamp. American cities such as New York drained peatlands for parks and urban development. Central Park was one of them. And they also drained them for public health reasons. Leading agriculturalists such as Henry Flagg French saw peatlands as the miasma on unhealthy soils of the poison of unwholesome water. They thought cholera came from peatlands. Flagg invented the French drain, which is still used to this day. Swamp Acts of 1849, 1850, and 1860 led to the drainage of 65 million acres of peatlands in the United States. And now peatlands represent just 3 to 4% of the Earth's landscape, but they store twice as much carbon as all of the world's forests. And what we're talking about here today, the Hudson Bay and James Bay lowlands, in some places store 5 times more carbon than the equivalent area in the Amazon rainforest. And as these frozen peatlands thaw, landscapes slump and carbon is released. The lowlands are really special because this is where 1,000 polar bears live in summer and fall. And female polar bears den in peat of the lowlands. They're the only polar bear in the world that dens and spends their time summer in the boreal forest. And this is what one of these peat dens looks like. And I'd show you what it looks like inside when I crawled into one, but it was a little bit too dark. I'll let you know that we were pretty certain that there were no bears here. The track seemed to lead away back to Hudson Bay. And so the biologist and the helicopter pilot felt confident enough to allow me to go in there. until the pilot started taking off and then poked me and showed me this, what was down below above the den. If you can see the behind of that polar bear, the polar bear was always there. So I'm not going to try that again. Now, both migratory tundra caribou and woodland caribou inhabit the lowlands. And this is probably one of the very few places in the world where you see that. And wolves prey on caribou. And you can see this poor guy. We found him being chased down by a pack that was obviously driving him out. And he was no better for it. Fox feed on what's left behind. And the lowlands also provide nesting sites for millions of waterfowl and shorebirds. Here you have the world's highest abundance of peat-loving palm warbler and very likely a high proportion of the global population of the mysterious yellow rail, a small chicken-like marsh bird that is rarely seen and little studied. You get orchids such as this wonderful lady slipper, one of my favorite plants, are found in peatlands. The carnivorous sundew, which is a cold weather plant, but I found one on the Alakai Swamp in Hawaii. And it was interesting. There's a lot of theories about how it got there. Cloudberries, blueberries, and cranberries, and untold numbers of moths and butterflies. And many of the largest rivers in Canada drain the lowlands, such as the Harricana in Quebec, the Severn in Ontario, which I've canoed, and the Seal River in Manitoba, which I've canoed, and been startled to see some polar bears greeting us at the end of it. Peatlands are also extremely important because they filter and store water more efficiently than forests do. And a healthy peatland can stop or slow a wildfire in its tracks. And they mitigate flooding because they can hold so much moisture. There's still so much to learn about peat that we don't know, such as this picture plant. A University of Toronto botanist recently discovered that they not only eat flies and mosquitoes, they eat juvenile salamanders, which was remarkable. And think of this, the world's largest tropical peatland was discovered in the Congo in 2017. In 2017, Alana Smolers from McMaster discovered that Massasauga rattlesnakes in Georgian Bay den in peat. And this moth was thought to be extinct until one was found in a fen in 2009. And now that we know that they live in fens, dozens of more have been found since. Interestingly, unlike sea ice, glaciers, and ice caps, we can restore peatlands as much as the rest of the world is doing. The Chinese are doing it in the Zogi Plateau, spending billions of dollars undoing what they did when they tried to drain this mountain peatland. Many European countries are now doing it because they are literally sinking into the sea because peatlands do not absorb the moisture coming in from the ocean and rivers. Russia is wetting its peatlands with the help of Germany to stop the fires that are tearing through Siberia with regularity. And the US Fish and Wildlife Service is restoring the Great Dismal Swamp. And Canada is in a good position because most of our peatlands are pristine, but they won't be for long, as I think we'll discover later on in this. I think now is the time for action, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. Yeah, great overview of the riches you'll find if you read Ed's book. Just packed full of amazing stories that he's just touched on here. Our next panelist is Vern Chihu, who is the Director of Lands and Resources for the Mushkegowuk Council, which is an organization that represents 7 First Nations across northeastern Ontario, and Vern will probably tell you more about that. Vern has been one of the top leaders in educating the world about the importance of the Hudson Bay, James Bay lowlands, and its role in the issues around climate.
Jeff, can you unmute yourself? Sorry, I think I muted you by accident.
Okay. Yes, I'm not sure where you muted me, but Vern has been one of the top leaders in advocating for the importance of this special place that we're going to be talking about, and he's been speaking about it and leading all sorts of efforts to increase awareness and to think about the future of these lands. And he's also, just as an aside, you may see in his bio that Jen will post in the chat, I think he's an accomplished musician, and I've had a chance to hear him a few times. Just amazing person all around. So yeah, we're going to start off with a video that the Meshkaigua Council put together, and then hear from Vern.
Hi, good afternoon. Nice to be a part of this, and happy to participate. And welcome to everyone, and thank you for that introduction, Jeff. And the work that we're doing at the Mushkegowuk Council, as Jeff mentioned, we represent 7 communities who are within the James and Hudson Bay Lowlands, and some of which are further south towards the Great Lakes of Ontario. And there's 2 communities further north along the Hudson Bay coast on the west side, which we work with, especially on the marine conservation project that we're pursuing. The Fort Severn First Nation, which is near the Manitoba border, and Winisk First Nation, just near the tip of the Hudson Bay, and where the Hudson Bay and James Bay meet. These 2 communities we work with, along with the 7 others that are within our tribal council. But the region that we're looking at is said to be the largest peatland complex in the world. When you combine the Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec, the wetlands is the largest wetlands in the world. And our territory is right smack in the middle of this this huge complex, which our people called Aski Yehewan, which means the breathing lands of the territory. It's the lungs of Mother Earth, is what the elders call it as well. And you know, we recognize that we are part of the environment. We are the wetlands. We are the water. We are the environment. We are the animals, the migratory birds, the fish, and so on. We are part of that ecosystem. We are part of how the cycle of life works within our region, and we are not superior to it. So what we do to it, we do to ourselves. And we've been noticing a lot of changes lately, you know, from the climate change that's threatening the region. And it's causing, you know, difficulties for the communities. Food security is an issue. It's very difficult to travel within these wetlands, and especially now because of how climate change is impacting, how the wetlands freeze, how the ice forms within the waters, the rivers, the James Bay, which are our travel routes when we travel to the hunting areas. The weather is becoming unpredictable. We see more winter rains than we ever have. We had cold temperatures of 35 to 45 below for long periods of time in the winter time when I was young. But nowadays, that's changed. You know, the winter rains, they'll come in January, which is, you know, our coldest month of the year, January and February. And right now, as I speak, December 16th, we have like 7 above, and the snow's melting, you know, it's a bit of rain falling. So we, you know, we see these changes. And not too long ago, geese were said to be migrating south from the north. Some geese had stayed behind, and because of the weather, they've stayed longer and now are migrating to the south. And so those changes are happening, and it's making it more difficult for people to go out and gather food out on the land, and it's getting costly. We have a winter road season, you know, for communities to access the infrastructure south of where they are, because they're isolated communities up in the north, and the winter roads allow them access to get to the stores, you know, to buy their supplies and food and things like that. And the winter road also brings in major supplies for housing, you know, infrastructure development within the communities. The roads are used to help with that for the community when it comes to building houses and the infrastructure that goes with that. And so those winter roads the season has shortened, and so it's making it difficult for the communities to get their supplies, and eventually have to fly in their supplies in the summertime because they ran out of winter road because of the early melt, the early thaw, and the winter rains, which are causing trouble there. And so the cost goes up, the cost of living. access to the land, some people have to use helicopter to fly to their traditional lands because they can't travel by the rivers or by the out on the land because of difficulty in maneuvering around the soft areas within the wetlands. And so that's impact on the people. And so what we're trying to do is, bring attention to this region. And, there's potential threat to the west of us called the Ring of Fire. It's a huge potential development, which is said to be about a 100-kilometer radius, the size of this region that they're looking to mine, which is right in the Hudson James Bay lowlands and down upstream from us. And so we're calling for the governments to make sure that they look at this region in terms of how this might be impacted downstream, the cumulative impacts on our wetlands, on the peatlands. And it's said that it's going to disturb within that 100-kilometer radius, a huge amount of peatlands, because that's where it is. And so the peatland complex, its ability to store carbon will be impacted, and it's they can't reverse it. Once they disturb it, they won't be able to restore it to what it normally would do. So it's a threat to the wetlands region, and we're calling, on the governments to have a really close look at this region before anything should happen or impact it in any way. And our climate summits that we've had over the last 4 years, the science behind, what was said is that the best thing you can do with the wetlands is to leave it alone and allow it to do what it has done for centuries, and that's sequestering carbon, and it's still sequestering carbon today. And so we want to bring that attention, and we want to take advantage of the federal government's mandates in protecting 25% of Canada's lands and oceans by 2025 and 30 by 30. And and thus we have a new memorandum of understanding that we signed with Parks Canada to protect the ocean waters, the James Bay and the Hudson Bay, to try and create a national marine conservation area in this region to protect that. And we look at the watersheds, the wetlands, and the marine region as one ecosystem, because one feeds the other. And so that's where we stand. We need to have a really good look at this region before anything should happen. And because we are feeling those impacts, Indigenous people in our region, we don't contribute much to climate change, but we're feeling the impacts of it. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Vern. And I will just mention to Jen, I don't know if you know that this video is sort of spinning here, but at least on my screen. But anyway, we'll move on. Our next speaker is Badgio, who's the conservation director for Wildlands League. She may tell you more about that, but I'll just say that very vital environmental conservation nonprofit working in Ontario. And I've known Anna for many years, and just count her as one of the most dynamic and strategic conservation thinkers and leaders in Canada right now. And just been she's been doing amazing stuff, and has been a great partner for us and for many Indigenous organizations and governments. And look forward to hearing what she has to say about the Hudson Bay James Bay Lowlands.
Thanks, Jeff. I wanted to begin by thanking Vern for his comments. They were great, and I really appreciate always hearing from Vern. So I wanted to thank Jeff from Audubon and Jen from Island Press for inviting me. I wanted to congratulate Ed on his wonderful book, and I'm so glad to hear that it's flying off the shelves. And I just wanted to also thank and acknowledge Vern and his team, and you know, all the Indigenous people that where the peatlands overlap with their homelands, because they're working so hard to secure their homelands, and they are a real inspiration to me every day that I get a chance to work with them, including people in KI, in Moose Cree, in Winisk. So there's some amazing people all across the peatlands. They're doing some great work. And I also wanted to give a shout out to the scientists, because they really toil to ask questions and collect the data, and sometimes, you know, they think their results may not matter, but they do. And in the last 10 years, we're getting a lot on the peatlands, and so I just want to give a shout out to the scientists to keep going, and thank you, and it really makes a difference. So I'm Anna Badgio with the Wildlands League, and we're a Canadian charity, and you can learn more about us at wildlandsleague.org. And I just wanted to say, before we get that out of the way, I just wanted to say that I was inspired by Ed to offer up an ode to wetlands. For 2 summers in the 90s, I was known as the Turtle Girl in Georgian Bay, and I spent 2 summers, 2 field seasons chasing turtles and relocating snakes and responding to calls from campers and cottagers. And I've always been at home in the wetlands, and I think it might have been the universe's way to prepare me to actually a little bit later in my career work in the Hudson Bay lowland. Whoops. And this is the purple here is the Hudson Bay lowland as it extends across Ontario into Quebec and also into Manitoba. And I'm just showing again the territory of Mushkegowuk. This is the area that Vern was talking about. The breathing lands are ancient ecosystems, as Ed was talking about. They store a tremendous amount of carbon. They've been cooling the planet for thousands of years. We know they hold about 30 gigatons of carbon. Giga is 10 to the 9 with 9 zeros, so that's a lot of carbon, and it's probably an underestimate. And just to show you how things have been changing, you know, when I was working in Georgian Bay, the conventional thinking back then was for every meter of peat that was accumulating, it took about 1,000 years to accumulate that peat. But now we know, and thanks to some of the science, that it actually takes a much longer. And so we know it's now more like 1 meter of peat takes 5,000 years to accumulate. So we're really dealing with ancient ecosystems that we just can't be messing with in a thoughtless way. And that's thanks to Lorna Harris and her team. We're also figuring out that it's irrecoverable. This peat and this carbon is on such a magnitude that if we disturb it and disrupt it, it cannot be recovered by 2050. And that's our goal, to reach net zero. And in many ways in our country, and I hate to say this, but we're flying blind. We are not really understanding how much carbon is in the peatlands. We're not understanding the disturbances that we're putting up here and what it's costing us. And so this is something that we quickly need to get our heads around. The world is certainly starting to pay attention to the Hudson Bay lowlands. They are a powerful nature-based solution to climate. The United Nations Environment Program identified the Hudson Bay lowlands as a region where global action would deliver the most to achieve biodiversity conservation goals and mitigate climate change. So now the world is starting to identify that this region is super important, not just for climate, but for biodiversity. And Canada and the provinces, they need to catch up, and they need to do it fast. This map hot off the presses shows you the peatlands extending from Manitoba all the way into Quebec. And we have the most data right now for Ontario, but as you can see, a lot of development is hanging on the edge of the peatlands, and those peatlands are in purple. And there's changes coming, and there's a lot of things on the horizon, including a proposed mining project that Vern mentioned. It's nicknamed the Ring of Fire, and in the middle of that map with the that yellow crescent, those are all the mining claims in the Ring of Fire. The challenge we face, and I'll talk about that in a second, is that development first is still the dominant approach in the peatlands. We don't have a plan to safeguard the peatlands or its watersheds. And the Ford government is taking steps to speed up development. And for those of you who may be from outside of Ontario, Doug Ford is the Premier of Ontario. So in case you're wondering who Ford is. And so the Ring of Fire is it's the nickname for a mining district. One of the early people that found some of the deposits here were Johnny Cash fan, and so they called it the Ring of Fire. Right now we have about 17,000 mining claims in the Ring of Fire, covering over 360,000 hectares. It's a massive area. I had the opportunity to fly over the Ring of Fire a number of times in the last 10 years. I've been on the ground in the Ring of Fire, and what I would just like you to note is that this footprint is not benign. Like, if you can see those lines radiating out from this is a exploration camp. We're not even at full mine development yet, and there is quite an impact on the ground. This is what a drill site looks like, and you can see there's a lot of clearing of the land. And so this is not something, and you can see the Big Sioux drill in the foreground. There's another drill in the background. This is a heavy footprint, and something that we need to be paying more attention to. This is a flight that we did over the Ring of Fire, and you can see all the drill pads, and you can see where they drag that heavy machinery through the peatlands, and it leaves a lasting impact and a lasting footprint. And these are impacts that are happening today, even before full mine development. And with exploration mining, there is no environmental review before exploration. In fact, the only environmental review that might happen is if the Indigenous peoples that look at the permits do their own environmental review. Rehabilitation is minimal, and as you can see, this is years after exploration has happened, that it's still there. And some of the science coming out most recently by Lorna Harris and her team showed that about 150 to 230 megatons of carbon could be lost if the Ring of Fire is developed. And that's carbon. If you look at CO2 equivalent, it's a much bigger number. And if you're wondering what does that number mean, that's the high number there of 844 megatons. That's larger than Canada's entire 2019 budget in terms of how much greenhouse gases it emitted. So these are vast, vast numbers. But the key takeaway is that if we want a livable, climate-safe future, proactive steps are needed to safeguard the peatlands, and they're going to need to be at scale. And they're going to need to be in partnership with Indigenous peoples. And so one of the places that I've been working on for a number of years, and I've had the good fortune to work with Jeff on it and others, is the North French watershed. And the North French straddles the peatlands and the boreal forest, and that would be a really good place to start. The North French holds about 639 million tons of carbon, and it's a place that I think if we can protect it and then also find alternatives to traditional resource development, we can start to build a different future than just mining and road building. So thank you, and I just wanted to ask Jen to end with a short video.
Thank you, Anna. So now we have some time for some questions. Maybe we can just start off with a broad one that all the panelists could weigh in on if they'd like. People are very aware of both the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. You know, we're hearing about both of those things in the news constantly. Can you talk a little bit about the interlink between those two issues, and also the potential for the interlinking of positive solutions to both of those in the Hudson Bay, James Bay lowland area? I don't know, Ed, do you want to start? We can go in the do Ed, Vern, and Anna.
It's almost, it would almost take a day to describe how everything is interlinked. I guess the thing that comes to mind is that we're in a territory where land is sometimes water and water is sometimes land, and you have both terrestrial and aquatic species that depend on this ecosystem, which is so very difficult to define, and has been described by many as unproductive because parts of it are very acidic and you don't have a lot of variety of trees there. But it's a false light because, you know, when you think about it, you've got several million birds that fly north into the peatlands for the reproductive purpose of sending an equal amount or more back south. And so you have to really look at it in a much more holistic way, that simply trying to describe it as it is futile. It just has so many ecological services that it provides that are largely unappreciated by decision makers in this country, and to some extent by the public because of all the prejudices that we've had towards bogs, fens, swamps, and marshes. That I think that this is an education program. It's a work in progress that I think that we've. It's a challenge, but I think that it's one that will pay great dividends simply because there's so much to derive from this: carbon storage, filtering water, separating microbes from the water, mitigating floods, stopping or slowing wildfire, the number of pharmaceuticals that it provides for Indigenous people, the root vegetables and berries that you find exclusively in these peatlands that are a source of food, not only for Indigenous people, but also for wildlife. I mean, the list is just an incredibly long one. And I think this is now my mission for some time now, to try to make the public aware of, the muskeg, this wasteland that we typically have described in the past is much more than the sum of its parts.
Thank you, Ed. Vern, do you want to?
Yes, yeah, it's, the one time when we was working with MNRF and the communities, Mushkegowuk communities, as a liaison, we flew over the region, and the government people said it's a vast land of nothingness, and so when we went to the finally landed in the community and went to the meetings, I had the opportunity to tell them that what you see as a land of emptiness is actually a network, a series of trails, camps, and where people live and where people go to access their food and things like that. There's a whole network there, and at that time we were working on upgrading the forest fire system for MNRF. They were calling on the community people to come forward to talk about that, and they brought forward all these huge losses that they experience when they allow fire to burn in the region, which was camps, tools, and all those things that they used in the wetlands. But I guess to the topic of the wetlands and the connectedness of the region, is complex, and in the research that was done on the quantification of carbon and things like that, and the work that the wetlands does, if you put a value to it, they said it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $700 billion per year in services that this region provides. And that's that what Edward was had mentioned on the aquifers and filtering water, the habitats, the many thousands or millions of birds that come to the region. All of that supports about $700 billion per year in services. And how do you equate that to an area that's that Ontario wants to develop, and what they say in 150 years will provide maybe $64 billion in revenue? How do you equate that with something that that provides $700 billion a year in services? And I've asked experts, do you think that this region can coexist with the largest wetlands in North America, the second largest carbon sink in the world? And they said, good question, we don't know. So we said, well, how do you I don't understand, that you want to develop this region, but you don't know if it's going to impact the wetlands. And this is where we need to really push for the governments to recognize that this region is important not only to us, but to everybody in the world because of what it does, right? If we damage that region, you know, we're damaging ourselves throughout the whole world. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Vern. Do you want to say a few things? And maybe one thing you could add in is potentially is there some questions about what exactly is being suggested for mining in the Ring of Fire, and what, in other words, what minerals, and also what are there some opportunities for people to get engaged in this process in the future?
Thanks, Jeff. So the Ring of Fire is, like I said, it's a nickname and it's kind of caught on. So it's kind of another affront to the Indigenous people that live there, that their territories have now been called yet another name. In terms of, about 12 years ago, 13 years ago, the big play was for nickel and chromite, and chromite is a component of stainless steel. Any of you that have been listening to Ontario media or Ontario politics may have heard that Doug Ford is now talking about components to support electric vehicle manufacturing in Ontario. So the story is now changing. Nickel is nickel would help with that, certainly, but it would be a small project, and then the big project that would have probably some significant impacts would be the chromite. And of course, any road that may get built to the Ring of Fire to access these things would be quite devastating, because roads beget roads, and it induces more development. And we would be opening up a region we don't really know how to open, and we don't fully understand the consequences, and we have to cross major rivers, and we're going to be disrupting and destroying and degrading peatlands and carbon and releasing carbon. And so in terms of what we're seeing in the Ring of Fire, a lot of people are paying attention. We've been paying attention for many years. It is frustrating because of the hope and the hype. If you're interested in seeing a bit of the ground truthing, the Globe and Mail did some good pieces a couple years ago on the values that have been talked about in terms of how much the Ring of Fire is worth. And they did some ground truthing and found those numbers were actually nonsense. They weren't very deep, and they were superficial and shallow. And so we don't even have real numbers to base all this excitement and hope and hype on. The one thing I did want to mention is that the world is actually, when you look at the target of 2050, or this net zero target by 2050, the world is banking on that half of the CO2 emitted, whether it's through fossil fuels or land use conversion, would still be absorbed by nature, would still be taken up by forests and peatlands and the ocean. And we can't keep degrading these same ecosystems that we need to help us achieve our net zero target. And so this is the paradox we find ourselves in. And our window is getting smaller and smaller because our budget is limited. So I even asked, can we even afford the Ring of Fire? And can the world afford the Ring of Fire? Those are some of the questions that still keep me up at night.
As we're winding down here, just the last couple of minutes, did any of you have a quick last comment or any suggestion for how people can get engaged and involved?
So we do have a website. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Vern.
Yeah, we do have a website, the www.mushkegowukmarine.ca, which we would be able to access all that information. Whoever writes in, sends us letters, or can work through that and is aware of that. And we also have a Facebook page in which we post, we call it the Mushkegowuk Lands and Resources Facebook page, in which we post a lot of things that people pass on to us in that region, for the region, for the wetlands. So just one, thing I wanted to add to the Ring of Fire story is that early on we heard that when the Ring of Fire is fully developed, you could be looking at a population of 150,000 people living in the region. So how do you say that that's not going to impact when you have the infrastructure and what's going to be used, right, to impact the region, the water, and so on. Anyways, thank you.
Well, one thing, Ed, unless Ed, you have an action you want to get people to do?
Maybe just to remind people that in the Yukon and Northwest Territories, the #1 driver of the economy right now is not mines, but cleaning up mines.
Mm-hmm.
Good point. And then I guess in terms of an action, if people want to take action today, there is a Indigenous protected area right now that, and the one that we just shared, the North French video, that's a new video, brand new, just sharing it we're generating some letters to the Ontario government. This is an Indigenous protected area that are partially in the peatlands and partially in the boreal forest. But I think if this is this is a good place to start. If you can show and you can work with the Moose Cree is willing to work with Ontario. So Ontario, come to the table, and if you want to help support this, I think this is a great place to get started. And then obviously Vern and his team are going to be working with all the nations up the coast on the peatlands and identifying more Indigenous protected areas, hopefully in those watersheds. And that's what we really need to see happen. It's how do we safeguard the peatlands, but it has to be done with Indigenous peoples. And but you can take action right away. We set it up. It's nice and easy for the North French and get a letter into the Ontario government. And obviously we'll keep everyone posted on any future actions related to the peatlands or Ring of Fire.
And Jen, can you remind me if we need to cut off right now? I've forgotten whether we can go beyond 2 o'clock Eastern time or not. Sorry.
We can go till 2:15 if you want to keep going.
Okay.
If
Sure.
there's any further questions.
Sure. One question somebody asked was a little bit on a lighter note. Ed, what was your scariest moment in your various trips in peatlands, or especially in the Canadian peatlands?
Well, there are many. One that comes to mind was a bit of a discovery as well, as I did a 56-day solo kayak trip down the Nahanni, Liard, and the Mackenzie Rivers, which goes through, I think, 62 different peatlands. Anybody knows that country, it can be some of the coldest places in the summer and some of the hottest. And I transitioned from snow to intense heat, so hot that I was literally hallucinating, and my water filter broke down on me. Anybody who knows the Mackenzie River is incredibly silty. You can't drink the water straight from the river. It's got to be filtered out. So I was getting terribly dehydrated, virtually hallucinating, getting sunbaked. And then I saw this stream coming out of the hillside, just where the river constricts from about 1.5 kilometers wide to about 200 meters wide. And I paddled over to that stream, and sure enough, there was very fresh water trickling down, and it smelled of peat, very much like Scotch whiskey. And I drank heartily. And then as I walked up the hill, I looked upon this very huge, vast wetland that just went on forever. And there was orchids and mosses and I sloshed through it and I saw evidence of moose and caribou and black bears, and there was all kinds of berries that were just coming, ripening up. And then I went back to my kayak, and I began to set up camp, and I'd been eating nothing but beans and rice for about 6 weeks up in that point, and I was saving a package of Kraft cheese dinner just for the flavor of it, and started to cook it up. And just as it was boiling up and I was mixing it up, this conspiracy of ravens started to caw above me. And if anybody knows, when ravens are active, there's usually something down below that they're interested in. And as I looked up to that stream, I saw this grizzly bear coming down towards my camp. And so I ended up having one mouthful of Kraft dinner, and then ended up getting back into the kayak. And that was a bit of a scary moment, but it was also one great story in the book. Oh, and by the way, there's a wonderful story that when I went to Fort Good Hope, they told me that there was this firebird that lives there. And so every time that they come through camp, through that wetland, they stop and pay homage, because if you don't, then the firebird will bring you harm. And so I think that maybe the firebird sent the grizzly bear after me. But then the funny story after that was that when I look back on it, I discovered that the Satu people have decided to make this a protected area, which would be one of the largest protected area in the Northwest Territories. I don't know the Indigenous name for it, but they also call it the Rampart Wetlands. And it has enormous amount of oil and gas reserves in it, but they've just decided that it's not worth it because it's just such a productive place to hunt and trap and fish.
Great stories. Thanks, Ed. Vern, another question came in. This is a particularly heavy question in many ways, but somebody asked, who owns the land? Who owns the Hudson Bay, James Bay lowlands? Thought you might want to that question.
All right. How we believe is that we don't own the land. We borrow it from our future generations. So we're the caretakers of it. We look after it. The only people that think they own the land is the government, who have laid claim to the region, and they've signed treaties with the First Nations, saying that the First Nations gave up the land in the treaty signing. But our elders in the history of that said that we never gave up the land when we signed the treaty, because it doesn't belong to us to give it up. It belongs to our future generations. We borrow it from them. So there's no way that we would have gave it up, and that's the difference between the written treaty and the oral treaty as was heard by the people. So.
Thank you, Vern.
Yeah.
Anna, wondered if you wanted to weigh in on this. What more can Canada do to help or show leadership here in this region?
So while the peatlands are located in the provinces, on the the traditional lands of the Indigenous peoples, so in the Constitution, the provinces are the ones that are supposed to be making some decisions. But Canada has a really important role to play, because they have obviously climate change is really important to them, because political boundaries don't matter and it impacts all of us. And also the Hudson Bay Lowlands crosses interprovincial boundaries. So there's a couple of reasons how Canada can get involved. And what I would think, a couple of things Canada needs to do a bunch of things, but we need to start thinking about how to safeguard the peatlands quickly. And right now, all our systems are set up to develop it. They're even, even their own impact assessments are about developing it and looking at a project level scale. We really need something to look at the entirety of the peatlands. We need something to guide development, and we need to see proactive action on safeguarding the peatlands with Indigenous peoples. There are a few other, so Canada also needs to fix its accounting. They, when I said we're flying blind, peatlands are not being properly accounted for in our own accounting system for greenhouse gases. And we don't fully, when proponents come in and want to build a road, they may cross the peatlands, or maybe they want to, blast a mine. They don't pay the carbon costs. And so we really need to change that. And so it's not, you just can't, the atmosphere doesn't care where these molecules come from. We need, we're going to pay the cost as the people, and so are the future generations. But I think it's really incumbent on Canada to start fixing a lot of these gaps and then get out ahead and really figure out, can we afford this development? Does it make any sense? And, what do we need to safeguard? And how do we do this in partnership with the Indigenous people that live there?
Thank you. Vern, did you want to say something, or could you say something about the why the lands are sometimes referred to as the breathing lands, and sort of what that means?
And yes, and so and the elders have always talked about the land, the importance of it, and the importance of what the land does and what it provides for each and every one of us, what it provides for the habitats, for the birds and things like that. So when they say this is the breathing lands of Mother Earth, that this is how Mother Earth cleans the air, and how allows us that environment to be able to live the way we do, with the cleaning water and providing habitats for all the wildlife that we use in that region. So that the breathing lands is what cleans that for us, is what the elders talked about, and what it means, I guess, in terms of when they say that, right? Yeah, Helen, it's how we live with the environment, how we live together, as one.
As so, we do only have just a couple minutes here. Ed, do you want to say a quick comment on why people from the U.S. or other parts of the world should care about the future of the Hudson Bay, James Bay lowlands and other parts of the boreal region, and kind of sort of maybe generally like how their interest could help influence what happens?
Well, let me just provide a quick list. Most of your birds fly north, many of them to the Hudson Bay lowlands to reproduce and then fly back. That's probably, one of the most obvious things. But, I think that the other way of looking at it is that we're so enamored, Americans and Canadians, with places like, the savanna of Africa, and the remarkable wildlife you see there. But think about the fact that there are 1,000 polar bears living in a boreal forest in the summer and fall time. Huge numbers of caribou, both migratory and non-migratory. Fish, water that you can drink, as was shown in the video, without having to filter it. Beluga whales that migrate from Greenland, that come through Davis Strait into Hudson Bay and swim up the rivers like the seal, where they rub off their old skin. And as one elder in Manitoba told me, that it's kind of like a cafe for them. This is where they reunite and they chatter away. You can actually hear them chattering away. It's just a magical place, and it's the only reason why we've called them wastelands is because we've inherited all these terrible prejudices in the past. And maybe the last thing is the next time you go to see a Group of 7 exhibition, look at those ones where they show the swamps. That's a big part of their repertoire that's not appreciated. They were maybe the first non-Indigenous Canadians to recognize the beauty of these places. I'll end with that. And read my book.
Great. Well, thank you. I think we do have to end, and just want to thank Ed and Vern and Anna. Just great panel. Thank you, Ed, for writing an amazing book. And anyone who's out there listening, please get a copy of it, because you're gonna love it. Won't be able to put it down. And I hope you'll follow all of our various organizations to try to stay up with these issues and get involved. So thank you very much, and thank you, Island Press and Jen, for putting this together.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Yeah.
Bye.
Fill out your survey.
Great.